Hello, YouTubers. Joe Kersey here on Ash Wednesday, March 5th, 2014, here at about 14:20 in the afternoon Eastern Time. Now, today's little effort is going to be a bit of a double-pronged effort. The first bit is I'm going to tell you about this great piece I saw in the news here this morning, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about going to church here at noon on Ash Wednesday. Now, I subscribe to the digital edition of the Daily Telegraph. Let's see, it cost me about $38 a year. It's 20 pounds a year, and so that converts to about $38 a year. Right now, I don't know, when the Federal Reserve gets done printing money, maybe it'll convert to like $80 a year. But it's great. I mean, you get, first of all, since I don't get the Wall Street Journal, it has enough international news that I can get some news. Plus, I get a huge charge out of just the British way of life and the British approach to things, and unlike a lot of American newspapers, their comment section is very vigorous. I mean, they have a lot of very vigorously expressed opinions on a wide variety of topics, and so it's fun there. But today there was a piece, and I'll read you a little bit of it. It's headlined, Army Commander Bans Sandwiches in Attack on Barbaric Habits. And it's written by a reporter named Claire Carter. And it starts, sandwiches have been banned from an officer's mess after a commander noticed many soldiers were eating them with their hands, as he insisted a gentleman or lady uses a knife and fork. This fellow's name is Major General James Cowan, and he commands a division. I mean, he's a divisional commander. He's in charge of 20,000 soldiers and 2,500 officers in the 3rd UK Division. So, I mean, this guy isn't some lightweight, I guess. Well, I guess he had two beats. He had a beef about the sandwiches, and he also had a beef about, the officers were eating sandwiches with their hands, and then they were failing to stand when commanders entered the room. So he sent out some etiquette tips to counteract the, quote, frankly barbaric techniques and habits displayed by soldiers and officers. He says, quite a few officers in the divisional mess seem to be under the impression that they can eat their food with their hands, I suppose, as opposed to eating it with their mouths as if out of a trough. The practice of serving rolls and sandwiches must stop. And then he gives some tips. Let's just run through a few of these tips. We've covered the fact he expects gentlemen and ladies to use knives and forks when they eat. Then he talks about a dinner party. A good party relies on good conversation. This requires you to come prepared to be free, funny, and entertaining. I guess after you've had some sort of IED blow your ass, 50 feet and up to the air and kill 2 or 3 people next to you, you're really prepared to be free, funny, and entertaining, huh? Thank you letters are an art form, not a chore. It is generally considered better manners if the spouse is the person who writes. Well, that's going to unleash a can of worms, isn't it? I can almost hear them struggling to get free right now. The fork always goes in the left hand and the knife in the right. Well, thank the good Lord somebody finally says that, as opposed to the idiotic way we do that here in the United States. Holding either like a pen is unacceptable. I can't say as I've ever witnessed that. As are stabbing techniques. Well, hell, it's a fork. What else are you going to do with a fork? The knife and fork should remain in the bottom third of the plate and never be laid down in the top half. Well, how are you going to eat the food in the top 2/3 of your plate? Spin the plate around like a lazy Susan? What? Officers. 10 years ago, officers would stand up when the commanding officer walked into the room. This doesn't happen anymore. Well, you know, it's very interesting. He raises a good point. Now, I've never been in the military, but I'm certainly aware that that used to be the practice from guys that had been in the military. They talked about that. And that was one of the things, you know, when I took my 2/4 of ROTC, you know, that was one of the things right away. That was one of the first things they told you. But, you know, in my surgical training, and hell, even in anesthesia training, you know, when the staff man walked into the room, yes, it was a man, except toward the end when you started getting women coming in. You know, when the staff individual came into the room, everybody who was, you know, everybody who was not another staff individual stood up, you know, attending physician. So I'm no stranger to that ethic. I expect the junior officer to make an effort at conversation. Start by introducing yourself and talk on any civilized subject outside work. Well, you know, actually in the operating room, there were a couple of attendings that actually cultivated that art, you know, at the operating table, assuming you weren't talking about something that had to be talked about in relation to the operation. Yes, everybody was expected to be kind of on stage and carry themselves at their best. Successful marriage. I recently went to a Burns night. I'm assuming this was some sort of Scottish, you know, the poet maybe, I don't know. Spoiled only by a curious decision to sit husbands next to wives. The secret of a successful marriage. Now, this is a rather absolute statement. Perhaps this is not. Is this a necessary and sufficient condition? Is it just a sufficient condition? Is it a necessary condition? The secret of a successful marriage is never to sit next to your spouse at dinner, except when dining alone at home. It displays a marked degree of insecurity. Well, you know, I certainly never minded having to sit next to my wife when we were out to dinner. I didn't particularly mind it if I didn't get to, but I certainly didn't mind sitting next to my wife. You know, and I'm going to tell you right now, there were a number of other wives out in the world that I would absolutely not want to be seated next to under any circumstances. Let alone have them try to dance with me. Oh, those days are over. Thanks be to God. Grammar. In common with officialdom the world over, military writers love to use pompous words over simpler language, combined with underlining and italics. The wanton use of capitals, abbreviations, and acronyms assaults the eye and leaves the reader exhausted. Well, you know, the more I've read this, my first pass read through this was, I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. But the more I've read this, the more I'm thinking, you know, this guy's got a lot of reasonable points. I completely disagree with him about the sandwiches and knife and fork, having to eat a sandwich with a knife and fork, though. Maybe this is just sort of a British military thing as opposed to a U.S., you know, officers' mess type stuff or something like that. I don't know. Do they do that here in the United States? I don't know. So that was fun, I thought. Well, now on to the more, from the ridiculous to the sublime. Well, maybe not all that ridiculous, but certainly on to the sublime. As you can see from my forehead, today was Ash Wednesday, and I went up to church. And as I do each church service I attend, I always practice the readings ahead of time, even if I'm not scheduled to read, because you never know when somebody might be sick or they need somebody to fill in or whatever. And so Charles, first thing he said to me was, "You want to read?" I said, "Yeah, sure," because I'd read every week if I could, but this isn't the Joe Kersey show. It's God's show. And so we did, of course, we did the Isaiah 58, and then we did the Psalm 103, the whole psalm, yay! And then the 2 Corinthians, the tail end of chapter 5 through pretty much the bulk of chapter 6. Where St. Paul has another one of these great lists about these lists of contradictions, imprisoned yet free, sick yet alive. And then it ends, thinking that I have nothing, but yet I have everything. It really is one of the great pieces of the New Testament. And I've felt very humbled and privileged to be able to read that today. And Charles did a decent sermon. I think he was as near as I could take away from it, he was trying to draw a contrast between, not a contrast, but a relationship between a person developing empathy and that also corresponding with repentance about previous attitudes and actions in their life, particularly as it relates to how an individual has treated other human beings. Well, or for that matter, the world around him or her. So that went well. We had, actually, this was at noon. We had about 25 people there. And then on the way out, I was yakking with this buddy of mine up there, and he and his wife were getting into their car, and there's this big load of medics and things pull in across to the municipal parking lot across the street, and so we speculated a bit on that for a while. Then on the way home, I couldn't park in the parking lot today because, well, there's a huge crowd, I guess. I don't know. I think one of the fellows that rents a room in that parish house was having a big meeting with some clients. And anyway, so I parked up by the funeral home there and had to go out past this other intersection, and I see these cameras pointing down, over the red lights, and they're wired directly into the red lights. And I thought, I just wonder if Delaware has installed red light cameras. It would not surprise me, because I'll tell you, if that town can find some nanny state niggling way to annoy and harass its residents, it's going to find it and pass it and do it. Thank the good Lord I don't live in an incorporated area. Wow. Well, that covers it for today. So, bye-bye, YouTubers, and remember that dust we are, and to dust we shall return. And we are like grass, that flourishes, and the wind passes over it, and the place thereof shall know it no more. Alrighty now, bye-bye.